Welcome to Habeas Treasurous, where I try to decipher this book, There's Treasure Inside by Jon Collins-Black, in order to find one of the 5 hidden treasures. On today's episode, I'm going to continue my breakdown of the Pokemon box by answering your questions. Let's begin! The first question comes from Only Fans of Gold. They write, Yo HT, why do you think JCB taped a lily pad to his backpack for the Froakie? Could this be a clue? Great question, Only Fans. Yes, I think this line in the chapter is a clue, but I've struggled with what it could mean. This line in the story comes right after JCB talks about buying a jar full of flies from the local pet store, and right before he talks about listening to some John Coltrane in the car. So let's take a minute to read these 3 lines together. But I did pick up a jar full of flies from the local pet store to bring with us for a snack. I taped a lily pad to the top of my backpack, and the Froakie climbed up and made himself comfortable. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. It seemed appropriate. It's hard not to imagine that the jar of flies in the local pet store are intended to be clues in the first sentence. A lot of people have speculated that the jar of flies could be a reference to an Alice in Chains album of the same name. Now, I like the possibility of a music reference, but I just have a hard time making this connect to the local pet store. Other people have suggested that the jar of flies could be a reference to a famous drawing that John Coltrane did of his musical theory called the Circle of Fifths. Now, when I look at this, I totally can see how the grouping of notes around the outside of the circle does look like flies. But again, I struggle with connecting this to a local pet store. Therefore, I decided to start with trying to figure out what the local pet store clue could mean. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I don't take JCB's words literally. So I don't think we are actually looking for a traditional pet store like a PetSmart or a Petco. Instead, I think we could be looking for another type of pet store, one that sells petroleum products like a gas station. After all, this whole treasure hunt is road trip themed, so it might make sense that before JCB heads out on the road with the Froakie, he would stop at a gas station for some snacks. Interestingly, when I started researching gas stations, I came across Texaco, which has a symbol of a star inside a circle that looks very similar to Coltrane's Circle of Fifths. Could this be the connection that ties the jar of flies and Coltrane together? Maybe. But it still doesn't explain the original question from OnlyFans about why would JCB tape a lily pad to a backpack? One of the things that stuck out to me when I visited New Orleans and researched the French Quarter was how frequently I came across the fleur-de-lis symbol. I discovered that in addition to being the symbol of the New Orleans Saints, it's also the symbol of the royal Bourbon family from France, and at its core is a lily flower. It's basically synonymous with the French influence that's still felt through Louisiana, Arkansas, and all the surrounding states. So this made me wonder if maybe the lily pad in the story could be a symbol of the home of the fleur-de-lis, aka France, since a pad is how some people refer to their home, and there are lots of French references all throughout the Pokemon box story. Now this might not be right, but stick with me for a second. Pun intended. If JCB is making a connection to a country like France through the lily pad, then maybe he's making another country connection with the word taped. Now, when I think of tape, there are 3 kinds that come to mind: duct tape, masking tape, and Scotch tape. And out of these 3, Scotch tape is the only one that sounds country related to me, so I'm going with Scotland as the possible country connection. Now, on my last few Pokemon box videos, I've been building a case for why I think Route 66 might be a starting point for the hunt. So I decided to see if there were any towns along Route 66 that had a mixture of French and Scottish heritage. I really didn't expect much, so I was surprised when the town of Afton, Oklahoma popped up. Afton was named after a river in Scotland that Robert Burns made famous in his poem Sweet Afton. Afton, Oklahoma was also heavily influenced in the 1700s by early French fur traders, so check on the Scottish and French connections. But the reason I got really excited about the town of Afton is its name, Afton. If you break it into 2 pieces, you get aft and on. Aft in nautical terms means the back of a ship, so in a way, Afton could mean on back, like how the Froakie climbed up onto his backpack. Now, admittedly, I was still skeptical that this was the real answer to the clue. I felt like to really solidify Afton as an interesting location for the treasure hunt, I needed to find something that would connect to the jar of flies. And sure enough, in the small town of Afton, Oklahoma, one place stands out. It's called the Cross Star Flag and Tag. It's one man's homage to old Route 66. It has all sorts of colorful art and decorations and is free to visit, but this one picture showing all these Texaco branded gas pumps and signs got me the most excited for the hunt. Maybe the Cross Star Flag and Tag is one of the spots JCB wants us to discover along the hunt for the Pokemon box. Who knows? But it's definitely one of the more interesting stops along Route 66 from the pictures that I've seen. Okay, let's go to our next question. This one comes from Tight Cachet. They write, Yo HT, do you have any ideas on what JCB means when he writes the path was increasingly hemmed in? Great question, Tight C. Well, I know a lot of people think the hemmed in line is a clue leading to the Hemmed In Hollow Trail in Arkansas, and it very well could be. However, it does seem out of character for JCB to use such a direct clue by including the name of the trail directly in the story. It appears, at least to me, that JCB likes to hide the meaning of his clues behind a little wordplay. But if it's not hemmed in hollow, then where else could it be? Well, one thing that I found interesting when I was researching Afton, Oklahoma, is that just north of the town is a place on Route 66 where the road narrows quite a bit. This 9-foot wide section of the road is often referred to as the Ribbon Road or Sidewalk Road. It was one of the first sections of paved road in Oklahoma, and so when Route 66 was built, the engineers decided to use it even though it was much narrower than the rest of the road. The reason I like the Ribbon Road as a possible clue is because a ribbon hem is a popular way to finish off garment edges. Basically, you sew a ribbon on the raw edge of a garment to make it look nice. So, in this case, the clue hemmed in would make double sense. The road narrows, and it's also called the Ribbon Road, which is a type of hem. I feel like this is the type of clue that JCB is more likely to use because it's not as direct as finding a matching trail name. Also, what makes this stretch of Route 66 interesting is that it is only a short 10-mile drive from Ma Barker's grave. You may remember from an earlier video that I connected Ma Barker, the infamous leader of the Barker Gang, to the Mabostiff that JCB thinks he hears. The Mabostiff is a dog, so Barker would match the sound a dog makes, and the Mabostiff is modeled off of a Japanese crime family, just like the Barker Gang. The sign that the Froakie points to that reassures JCB that they won't run into a Mabostiff could be Ma Barker's grave since, well, the sign says she's dead. Anyway, that's all I've got for today's video. Thanks again to OnlyFans of Gold and Tight Cachet for sending in your questions. And in the words of Top 40 DJ Casey Kasem, keep your boots on the ground and keep reaching for those stars.